What if the most beloved person in the universe, a woman who single-handedly created 900 years of peace, was executed on live television in front of trillions of people? That's exactly what happened. But if you think you know how this ends, you better stick around, because the empire that pulled the trigger made one fatal miscalculation, and it was about to bring their entire kingdom crashing down. It all started on Concordia Prime, this gorgeous space station that had been the galaxy's symbol of unity for nearly 1,000 years. General Amara Chen, Earth's 63-year-old peacekeeper, was gazing out her window at an ocean of stars. She was a living legend, with a posture that never stooped, kind wrinkles around her eyes, and streaks of silver in her dark hair. The eyes of this woman had seen 17 brutal conflicts end, not with explosions, but with her steady, patient voice. She was the entire reason the galaxy was celebrating the 900th anniversary of what they called the Great Peace. She wasn't just some diplomat from Earth. For countless beings, she was peace itself, given human form. A soft tap on her door brought her back to the room. "Mom," a voice she knew better than her own said, "it's about time." Amara's serious expression melted into a warm smile as she opened the door for her son, Admiral James Chen. He was the spitting image of his father, sharp and focused in his military dress uniform. "You look a little wound up," Amara gently teased, seeing the same worry in his eyes that she often saw in her own mirror. "Well, you're about to give a speech to 10,000 different worlds, Mom," James shot back, a hint of a smile on his face. "One of us has to be the nervous wreck." She let out a soft, warm laugh. "I think I've done this once or twice before." "Not like this, you haven't," he argued gently. 900 years, the entire galaxy is watching you." She reached out, her hand resting on his cheek. "In that case, let's put on a show they'll never forget." As they walked through the station's magnificent halls, representatives from 1,000 different species moved aside for them, bowing their heads in a universal sign of respect. The corridors were a beautiful, chaotic river of life, creatures with 2 legs, 6 legs, and some with no legs at all, some sealed in environmental suits, others breathing the same recycled air. It was a perfect picture of everything Amara had dedicated her life to building. The main assembly hall stole your breath away. It was a gigantic dome that held 50,000 people, and there wasn't an empty seat in the house. Thousands of little floating cameras hovered in the air, beaming the ceremony across light years to trillions more viewers. Sitting front and center were the Big Five galactic powers, the scaly, four-armed Kree Alley, the hive-minded Vorn Collective, the graceful, silver-skinned Salaran Federation, and the enormous, rock-like Morak Dominion.
Ismet.
And right in the very middle of them all, practically dripping with arrogance, sat the Zarathaians. They were the oldest, most dominant empire in the galaxy, and they never let anyone forget that they were the natural-born rulers of the stars. Their leader, a man named High Archon Velketh, was dressed in robes of purple and gold. His people looked a lot like humans, only taller, with skin the color of a pale blue sky and eyes as cold and empty as the void between galaxies. The Zarathaians were already conquering star systems when humanity was still trying to figure out how to make a fire without rubbing 2 sticks together. Amara stepped up to the podium, feeling the immense gravity of the moment, and she began to speak. "My friends," she started, her voice full of a genuine warmth that reached every corner of the hall. "We are here today to celebrate something unbelievably precious. We are here to celebrate peace." She spoke of the dark times, of the horrific wars that had left scars on every species present. She paid tribute to the wisdom of their ancestors, who chose to build bridges between worlds instead of blowing them up. "For 900 years," she declared, her voice filled with passion, "we have shown the universe that we are so much stronger when we stand together." But High Archon Velketh wasn't hearing a word of it. He was thinking back to a time when humans were just loud little monkeys on a mudball planet nobody cared about. To him, they weren't partners in peace. They were an infestation, a weed that was growing too quickly and spreading too far. In just 9 short centuries, humanity had gone from being the new kids on the block to being leaders in the galactic community. They were excelling at everything: science, diplomacy, art, and culture. Their influence was expanding like a supernova. Velketh saw where this was going. He'd tried to warn his council that if they didn't do something, humanity would soon overshadow them all. The old, powerful empires would become a footnote in history. And so, they hatched a plan. A brutal, simple plan designed to put these newcomers back in their place. Just as Amara was speaking about a future they could all share, Velketh gave a tiny, almost unnoticeable nod. One of his royal guards, holding a weapon he'd hidden in the folds of his robes, took his shot. There was no loud bang, just a silent, blindingly fast beam of energy. The beam struck General Chen right in the center of her chest. For a single, terrifying second, the entire universe seemed to stop. Amara looked down, her face a mask of pure disbelief, as a dark red stain blossomed on her crisp white uniform. Her eyes desperately searched for her son, who was already sprinting toward her. And then they found the cameras, broadcasting her final moments to trillions. "Remember," she barely managed to whisper as her voice failed her. "Remember what we are." And then she crumpled to the floor. The hall exploded into chaos. Screams ripped through the enormous space as security teams charged the Zarathian delegation, who were already forming a protective circle around their Archon. James finally reached his mother, his hands frantically trying to stop the bleeding. He could see the light fading from her eyes, and he knew with a gut-wrenching certainty that she was gone. "Stay with me," he begged, his voice cracking. "Mom, please, just stay with me." But in the middle of all the panic, High Archon Velketh stood there, perfectly calm. He had expected some shouting, maybe a futile charge from the humans. All he saw was shock and grief. "This woman was a threat to the security of the galaxy!" Velketh's voice roared, silencing the chaos for a moment. "The Zarathian Empire has acted to defend you all from her secret terrorist affiliations." It was a lie so shameless, so insulting, it was almost a work of art. Before anyone could even process what he'd said, the entire Zarathian delegation disappeared in a series of bright flashes, teleporting back to their warships hiding in orbit. Moments later, their fleet ripped open a hole in space-time and vanished. Admiral James Chen was left kneeling alone in a pool of his mother's blood. Medical teams finally pushed through the crowd and rushed Amara to an emergency medical bay, leaving James with a cold, empty feeling in his gut that was quickly hardening into something like ice. The other delegates were in an absolute frenzy. Some were screaming for an immediate declaration of war, while others pleaded for calm. But James couldn't hear a single word. He moved like a zombie through the mayhem, his mind a silent, raging hurricane. He eventually found himself on the bridge of his personal flagship, the UEES Vengeance. In the cold, quiet darkness of his private quarters, he thought about his mother's entire life's work. 900 years of peace, destroyed in a single cowardly act. He thought about the sheer arrogance of the Zarathians. Then he opened a military-grade, encrypted channel to every ship in the human fleet. His face, now as cold and unforgiving as a block of granite, appeared on every single view screen. "This is Admiral Chen," he stated, his voice dangerously calm. "I'm sure you have all seen what just happened. General Amara Chen, my mother, was murdered by Zarathian forces during the peace summit." He let that horrifying sentence hang in the air for a moment. 900 years ago, humanity made a sacred promise to this galaxy. We promised to be the guardians of peace, and for 900 years we have kept that promise. His eyes, which were once so much like his mother's, now held a terrifying darkness. "Send the signal to all fleets." "Execute Condition Omega," he commanded. The old empires have forgotten the real reason that treaty was signed 900 years ago. I think it's time we gave them a little reminder. The channel cut out. Across all of human space, on hundreds of planets and thousands of starships, ancient, long-forgotten alarms began to blare. A war machine that had been sleeping for centuries had just been violently kicked awake. The Zarathaians thought they had been clever. They thought that by killing the icon of peace, humanity would crumble and beg for mercy. They had no clue that they hadn't just killed a peacekeeper. They had just unleashed the very monster she had spent her entire life trying to keep locked in a cage. The news spread through the galaxy like a plasma fire. Everyone saw the recording, playing over and over again. Amara's last words, "Remember what we are," became a chilling, unanswered question. But as the human fleets began to mobilize with a speed and coordination that left the rest of the galaxy in stunned silence, everyone was about to get their answer. The peace was over. The universe was about to get a history lesson it would never forget. He fed them a story, claiming that humanity's ambition was a cancer growing in the garden of the galaxy. He swore that the humans were planning to break the treaty themselves, and that his noble Zarathaian empire had only acted in self-defense. He assured the other galactic powers that they would either support his actions or stay out of it, because everyone knew humans were just amateurs, too weak and inexperienced to fight a real war. "They've become soft after all this time," Velketh announced to his council. "They've forgotten how to fight. The second they see the true might of our armada, they will surrender. It's in their nature." His advisors nodded along like mindless drones. The Zarathaian Empire had 50 times more warships than humanity did. Their technology was the stuff of legends, and their soldiers had conquered 100 worlds before humans even discovered metal. But not everyone was buying this story. Far away, on the Kree Alley homeworld, Ambassador Varmoth was in his private library, surrounded by towers of old books and data chips. All 4 of his hands were trembling as he broke the seals on classified documents that hadn't been opened in 900 years, documents that told a story so radically different from the official history that it was absolutely terrifying. The history books you could find in any public library said the galactic peace was a generous gift, a kindness offered by the older, wiser races to the younger ones, allowing species like humans to join the galactic family without any bloodshed. The official story claimed that humans were grateful, humble, and eager to learn from their elders. The official story was a complete and utter lie. Varmoth knew the truth. He was just a junior diplomat back when that treaty was actually signed. As he sifted through the old reports, the memories came rushing back. 900 years ago, we weren't alone. The Creeley found us first, a scrappy, primitive race just starting to explore our own solar system. They looked at us and saw an easy win, a simple species they could conquer and put to work. It was the biggest mistake they ever made. The Creeley invasion of Earth was over in 3 days. By the time the smoke cleared, half of their mighty fleet was just glittering space dust. We fought back with things they never saw coming: atomic weapons, chemical agents, and designer plagues. We turned our own planet into a fortress of death. Our sheer, brutal ferocity sent a tremor through the entire galaxy. But that was only the beginning. The Creeley panicked and called for help. 11 other species joined the fight against our little world. The powerful Vaughn Collective, the brilliant Silurians, the massive Morak, even the arrogant Zarathaians. It was 12 advanced civilizations against one lonely planet. It should have been a complete wipeout, and it was, just not for us. We humans learned terrifyingly fast. Every weapon they shot at us, we analyzed, we copied, and we made it better. Every strategy they used, we took apart and countered. They brought advanced ships, so we captured them and reverse-engineered them in a matter of weeks. We took their shiny tech and made it ours. In less than 5 years, humanity wasn't just defending Earth. We were pushing back. Our ships started appearing in star systems light years away, smashing their supply lines and military bases. We started freeing other species that the 12 powers had enslaved for centuries. The war dragged on for 20 long years. By the end, the great powers weren't trying to conquer us anymore. They were just trying to survive. Varmoth would never forget their last stand. The human fleet appeared over the Creali homeworld, so many ships they literally blocked out the stars. We had the power to burn their entire world to a cinder, but we didn't. Instead, a human general broadcast a single message to every soul on the planet. We never wanted this war. You brought it to our home. Now we're giving you a choice, peace or total annihilation. You have 1 hour to decide. The Creali chose peace, and so did the other 11 species. The Pax Galactica wasn't created by the wisdom of elder races, it was created by the mercy of humanity. Varmoth shut down the historical records and stood up. He walked directly to his comms console and sent a top priority message, not to his own leaders, but straight to the Zarathaean Archon. "Hello, Archon Velkiath," he started, his voice thick with the shame of 9 centuries. "You fools, you absolute galaxy-dooming fools. You just killed the one person who was holding them back." Similar scenes were playing out all across the galaxy as the old memories began to surface. On the Vaughn Central world, millions of bodies went rigid as the hive mind accessed its deepest, most terrifying archives. Memories of human soldiers who kept fighting even after their bodies were ripped to shreds. Memories of human scientists cracking communication codes that had stood for thousands of years. But there were other memories too. Memories of human kindness, of releasing prisoners of war, of treating the wounds of their enemies. The collective remembered the fear, a deep primal terror of a species that seemed to have no limits. On the Morak homeworld, ancient warriors gathered in their great halls to speak of the battles their grandfathers had fought. The Morak were the biggest and strongest species in the known galaxy. They prided themselves on fearing nothing. But the stories their elders told about the humans made their children shiver. "They just don't stop," the old warriors would say. "You can break their bones, but you can never break their spirit. They fight to win, or they fight until every last one of them is gone. And even then their children remember, and their children will come back for you." The Silurians, who considered themselves the most intelligent species, had tried to analyze us to figure out what made us so dangerous. Their conclusions were chilling. Humans were a threat because they could be anything they needed to be. They could be kind and they could be savage. They could be patient and they could be impulsive, logical, and emotional. They adapted to absolutely everything. They used every tool at their disposal, and they never, ever gave up. On 1,000 different worlds, beings who had known nothing but peace their entire lives felt a cold, ancient fear stirring in their hearts. Their parents had told them stories. Their grandparents had the scars to prove they were true. The galaxy had spent 900 years trying its best to forget what humanity was really capable of. Now, it was all flooding back. And then, something strange happened. Human space went dark. It started on the borders. Communication relays just went silent. Cargo ships suddenly changed course and headed home. Warships vanished from their patrol routes. Within 2 days, not a single signal was coming out of human territory. No ships went in, and no ships came out. The Zarathaeans thought it was hysterical. "They're running scared," Velkath announced to his council. "They know they can't win, so they're hiding like rats. Any day now they'll send a diplomat to beg for mercy." But the older races weren't laughing. The Cathali ambassador sent a private message to his government. "They are not hiding, they are preparing. I've seen this before. We all have. The humans always go silent right before they attack. They gather their strength, they finalize their plans, and when they come out..." He didn't have to finish the sentence. On the capital station, Concordia Prime, the other delegations were in a total panic, trying to figure out what to do. Some wanted to side with the Zarathayans. The humans are a menace, they argued. Maybe it's better to put them in their place now before they get any stronger. Others argued for staying out of it. It was a fight between humans and Zarathayans, so why get involved? But the Cathali ambassador stood up and spoke against both ideas. He stood before the entire assembly, feeling the incredible weight of history on his shoulders. "I was there," he said, his voice quiet but steady. 900 years ago. I was at the signing of the treaty. We didn't sign that treaty out of kindness. We signed it because we were absolutely terrified. We begged the humans to stop. We offered them anything they wanted if they would just end the war. He looked around at the faces of the delegates. General Chen wasn't just a diplomat. She was a living symbol. She represented everything humanity chose to be instead of what they could have been. She was their solemn promise to all of us that they would always choose peace. His voice dropped to a whisper you could barely hear. "And you shot her." He locked eyes with the Siluran delegation. "Your grandparents firebombed human cities from orbit, and the humans forgave you." He turned to the Morak. "Your ancestors enslaved entire human colonies. The humans freed themselves and still offered you a treaty." He then looked toward the empty seats of the Zarathayan delegation. "And now you have murdered the one woman who spent her whole life convincing her people to be gentle. You have just reminded them of every single crime we ever committed against them. You have woken up a monster that should have been left sleeping forever." The room was dead silent. What are they going to do?" someone finally asked. Varmuth closed his eyes. "They will come, and they will remind all of us, once again, why we were so afraid in the first place." Deep inside human territory, in secret shipyards hidden from every telescope in the galaxy, ancient machines roared back to life. Weapons that had been sealed away for centuries were being brought back online. Soldiers were receiving orders that had been passed down for generations. The humans weren't hiding. They were waking up. Deep beneath the red sands of Mars, in tunnels no alien had ever seen, lights began to glow for the first time in 900 years. Machines that had been sleeping since before recorded history began to hum with unimaginable power. Dust shook loose from metal hulls as ancient computer systems ran their checks and reported that everything was perfect. Commander Sarah Park walked through these tunnels, her heart pounding with a sense of sacred duty. She had known this place existed her whole life. Every human soldier did. But knowing about it and seeing it were two very different things. "How long has all this been down here?" her Lieutenant Cole asked in total awe, walking beside her. "Since before the treaty was even a dream," Sarah said. "Our great-great-grandparents built it. Their great-great-grandparents kept it running, and every generation since then has added to it." They stepped into a massive cavern, bigger than any city on the surface. As far as the eye could see, warships hung silently in the darkness, ready to launch. These ships looked nothing like the peaceful cargo haulers the galaxy was used to seeing. These were monsters built for war. "The Zarathayans think we have 3,000 ships," Sarah said with a grim smile. "They think they have us outnumbered 50-1. She waved a hand at the endless rows of silent, waiting vessels. "They are terrible at math." It was the same story all across human space. On Earth, vaults that were sealed by the original treaty signers were cracking open for the very first time. For 900 years, the seals on these vaults had been checked and maintained by a secret order whose only job was to be ready for a day everyone prayed would never come. Standing inside one of these vaults, Admiral James Chen looked at weapons that made his own modern fleet look like children's toys, devices that could literally tear holes in the fabric of space itself. He stared at shields that grew stronger with every hit they took, and warships that moved in ways that broke the very laws of physics. 900 years, he whispered. For 900 years, we prayed we'd never have to open these vaults. Standing next to him, His lead scientist, Dr. Emily Vance, gave a grim nod. Your ancestors were wise, Admiral. They knew peace was a fragile thing. They knew that someday, someone would forget that lesson. So every generation after them prepared, Emily said quietly. Your mother was in on all of this. She spent her entire life working to make sure we'd never need it. She paused, locking eyes with him. But she also made damn sure it would work if we did. James nodded, a cold weight settling in his chest. Just an hour earlier, he'd received the news. His mother was alive. The medics had pulled her back from the edge. She was in a medically induced coma, her body knitting itself back together, but she was going to pull through. And when she woke up, he vowed to tell her that the danger was over, that her life's mission to build peace could go on. Around the globe, the people of Earth began their preparations with a strange, quiet resolve. There was no chaos, no panic in the streets. Every family understood their part. Every child had learned the protocols since they could walk. The Galactic Treaty had forced humanity to lay down its arms and forget the art of war. Humanity had consented to be peaceful, but they never, ever consented to be helpless. There's a world of difference. Old veterans came out of quiet retirement, men and women from peacekeeping units who had trained their whole lives for a war that never came. They slipped into uniforms that had been perfectly preserved for decades, reporting to command posts they had only ever visited in simulations. And the next generation joined them, kids who were raised on heroic tales of the First Contact War, who played video games defending Earth, and who always had a quiet feeling that this day wasn't just a possibility. It was an inevitability. In schools all across human territory, teachers paused their lessons. The peace has been shattered, they informed their students. But you know our way. We fight only when there is no other path, and we remember that our enemies are still people. The students listened, their expressions grave. They understood. They always had. This was both the burden and the honor of being human, to work tirelessly for peace while staying eternally ready for war, to be gentle by choice but terrifying when necessary. On the colony of New Singapore, Governor Marcus Webb addressed his citizens. The Xyrithians think they have us figured out, he declared, his voice echoing. They remember the frightened, clumsy newcomers we once were. They have no clue what we have become. He raised a hand, showing a long, silvery scar that cut across his palm. My grandfather gave this to me, a permanent reminder of what our people suffered, a reminder to never drop our guard again. His voice grew thick with determination. We are not a weak people. We have never been weak. We simply chose peace. Now that choice has been stolen from us, and the entire galaxy is about to learn what happens when you back something into a corner that only wanted to be left alone. High above Earth, Admiral Chen walked onto the bridge of his flagship, the UES Vengeance. It was a state-of-the-art warship, constructed in the last decade, the brilliant jewel of humanity's fleet. But it was not going to fight by itself. All around it, ghost ships flickered into reality, from secret lunar craters, from hollowed-out asteroids, from forgotten corners of space no one would ever check. The old fleet returned. These were the vessels built in the dark days following the First Contact War, secretly preserved and silently upgraded by every generation, waiting for the one day they would be needed once more. The Xyrithians bragged about a fleet of 50,000 warships. Their spies told them humanity had 3,000 at most. The real figure was 30,000. And every last human ship was generations more advanced than anything the Xyrithians could possibly imagine. James Chen looked at the tactical display in his command center as his officers worked with the calm precision of true professionals. There was no excitement, no hunger for a fight. There was only a heavy sense of duty. Admiral, his communications officer said, the other galactic governments are calling us. They're demanding to know what we're planning. Let them stew, James replied without looking away from the map. They had a chance to prevent this. They sat on their hands. "Sir, the Crithali ambassador is on a secure channel. He says it's critical." James hesitated, then gave a small nod. The ancient, weathered face of the Crithali ambassador, Varmov, appeared on the screen. He looked worn out, heartbroken, and utterly terrified. "Admiral Chen," Varmov started, "you have to hear me out." "I'm listening." "I was there, 900 years ago. I saw what your people could do. I also saw what we did to push you to that point." The ambassador's voice shook with a guilt that was centuries old. "I'm sorry. I have been sorry for every single day of my very long life. When the treaty was made, I swore to spend the rest of my days ensuring it was honored." James was silent, his expression a perfect mask. The Xyrathians. They did this on their own. Many of us on the council tried to talk them out of it. We failed. Varmov leaned closer, his eyes pleading. "But please, Admiral, I am begging you. Remember the lessons your mother shared with the galaxy. Getting even is not the same as getting justice. Don't make the innocent pay for the sins of the guilty." For a long, heavy moment, James just stared. Then he finally spoke. "Ambassador, do you know the last words my mother said to me before she went to that peace summit?" "No." "She said that peace isn't simply a time without fighting. It's the conscious decision to fix problems without resorting to violence. She said we must always offer that choice first, even to those who don't deserve it." A spark of hope lit up in Varmov's eyes. "The Xyrathians will be given that choice," James went on, his voice becoming hard as steel. "We will not attack their civilians. We will not burn their cities to the ground. We will go straight to their leadership, and we will offer them the opportunity to surrender, to face a trial, and to pay for what they have done." He leaned in, his gaze sharp and unwavering. "But if they refuse, Ambassador, then we will dismantle their empire piece by piece, and there is nothing in this entire galaxy that can get in our way." The connection ended. Admiral Chen faced his crew. "Send the signal to the fleet. We launch in 6 hours." "What about the other powers, sir?" his executive officer inquired. "Do you think they'll try to stop us?" "They remember," James said plainly. "They remember who we are. They won't interfere." And he was correct. All across the galaxy, the major powers watched in shocked silence as the human fleet assembled. They saw ships in numbers they couldn't believe, armed with weapons they couldn't comprehend, and using technology that shouldn't even be possible. The analytical Vaughn Collective calculated the probability of winning a war against this human armada. The computation was immediate. The result was 100%. Absolute and total defeat was a mathematical guarantee. They would stay out of it. The terrifying Morak War Council argued for less than a minute. Their ancestors had passed down a single simple rule through the ages: never ever start a fight with humans. They would stay out of it. The Silurians, the Cathali, every race that remembered the sheer terror of the First Contact War came to the very same conclusion. This was a final score to be settled between humanity and the Xyrathians, and nobody was foolish enough to step into the middle of that. Aboard his flagship, Admiral Chen spoke to his senior staff. Behind him, the serene stars of home twinkled in the dark. 900 years ago, he said, his voice firm and clear, our ancestors taught the galaxy to be afraid of us. Today, we are going to remind them why. He turned to face the main view screen, toward the cold emptiness where the enemy lay in wait. All ships, engage hyperspace drives. We are going to war. 30,000 points of light flared brightly and then winked out, leaving behind only empty space where the most formidable fleet in history had just been. The sleeping giant was finally awake, and it was beyond angry. High Archon Velketh stood on the bridge of his own flagship, the Imperial Majesty, a confident smirk on his face. In front of him, the incredible power of the Xyrathian Empire was arranged in flawless, orderly rows. 50,000 warships, the largest fleet the galaxy had ever witnessed, stood ready to defend the glorious empire. "The humans are en route," his tactical officer reported. "Our long-range sensors are detecting roughly 30,000 vessels." Velketh's smirk widened. 30,000? That was more than they anticipated, but they still had the numbers. And it was a known fact that Zarathean ships were superior, their crews had more experience, and their strategies had been perfected over 10,000 years of conquest. "They are flying here to be destroyed," Velketh laughed. "Let them come." The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace with chilling accuracy, materializing right at the edge of the Zarathean formation. For a few quiet, tense moments, the two colossal armadas simply hung in the void, facing each other. Thousands upon thousands of ships, their shields shimmering, their weapon systems humming with raw power. Admiral Chen stared at the enemy fleet and felt absolutely nothing. Not a trace of fear, not a shred of doubt, just an ice-cold determination to end what the Zaratheans had so stupidly begun. "Open a channel," he commanded. "Broadcast on all frequencies. I want every last one of them to hear me." His officer did as he was told. "Channel is open, sir. To the Zarathean fleet, this is Admiral James Chen of the United Earth Navy. Your leaders have committed an unprovoked act of war by trying to assassinate General Amara Chen during a peace summit. To High Archon Velketh and all officers behind this gutless attack, surrender now without condition. You have 1 hour. If you refuse, we're coming through your entire fleet to get you." When the message reached Velketh, he just threw his head back and laughed. It was a deep, arrogant sound that filled the bridge, and his officers, ever the sycophants, nervously chuckled along. "The nerve!" Velketh roared. "Can you believe the absolute stunning audacity of these little insects? They're outgunned, outmatched in every way, and they have the gall to demand our surrender?" He keyed his own comms. "Human fleet, this is High Archon Velketh. It seems your pathetic little species has forgotten its place in the galaxy. Today, you get a lesson. We will tear your fleet apart. We will turn your worlds to glass, and your children will learn what it means to kneel before their rightful masters." He snapped the channel shut and whirled on his tactical officer. "All ships, full advance. I want every last one of them turned into dust." 50,000 Zarathean warships surged ahead, a steel tsunami ready to crash down. Admiral Chen watched them approach, his face a mask of calm. Around him, his officers were rigid with tension, their knuckles bone-white. They'd spent their lives training for a day like this, but a simulation is one thing. This was the real deal. This was the final exam. The Admiral's weapons officer leaned close, his voice strained. "Sir, the enemy fleet is entering the kill box for our main cannons." "Hold," the Admiral commanded, his voice as steady as granite. "Let's let them get comfortable first." The Zaratheans, blinded by their own arrogance, chewed up the distance between the fleets. On thousands of their bridges, weapons whined as they powered up, targeting systems painting the human ships. And then their commanders gave the order that would seal their fate. Fire. The first volley was a horrifying sight. A storm of thousands of energy beams and missiles ripped through the void, aimed straight for the human formation. It should have been a slaughter, a single devastating strike that would have crippled dozens of ships. But it wasn't. The entire barrage hit nothing but empty space. The human ships were moving in a way the Zaratheans couldn't comprehend, flowing through the battlefield like a river around boulders. Their engines were doing things to physics that Zarathean engineers would later call impossible, like pure witchcraft. Not a single shot connected. Before the enemy could even process what they'd just seen, the humans fired back. The first Zarathean ship to die was a colossal battlecruiser, the Eternal Glory. One moment, it was a mountain of steel spitting fire and fury. The next, it was just gone. No fireball, No debris field, not a single piece of twisted metal. It had been erased from existence. Then another ship vanished, and another after that. On the bridge of the Imperial Majesty, Velketh stared at his tactical display, his brain refusing to process the information. "What is happening?" he screamed. "What are those weapons?" But no one could give him an answer. No one had ever seen anything like them. The human fleet cut into the Zarathian lines like a surgeon's scalpel. Their ships moved with a terrifyingly perfect coordination, each one dancing to a silent rhythm. Their weapons struck with pinpoint accuracy, deleting warships from reality while carefully, deliberately, leaving supply ships and medical transports completely unharmed. Zarathian commanders frantically tried to adapt. They ordered new formations, desperately tried different tactics, and screamed for backup. It was completely pointless. Every formation they tried, the humans had already countered. Every trap they set, the humans sidestepped with impossible grace. Every advantage they had relied on for centuries, the humans turned into a deadly weakness. "Retreat!" Velketh finally bellowed, his voice cracking with panic. "All ships, fall back to defensive positions!" But there was nowhere to run. In a blink, human ships materialized directly behind the Zarathian fleet, slamming the door on any hope of escape. They appeared above and below, trapping the Great Armada in a perfect cage. The hunters had officially become the hunted. The battle was over in 6 hours. When the smoke cleared, the entire Zarathian fleet was gone. Not just beaten or broken, it was completely annihilated. 50,000 warships were now just a massive field of silent, drifting wreckage. And the human losses? Just 147 ships. All across the galaxy, entire civilizations watched the live feeds in shocked silence. They saw the most feared military in history swatted aside like a fly. They saw human ships pull off maneuvers that should have been impossible. What they saw was the terrifying, beautiful result of a species that had been quietly getting ready for this exact day for 900 years. But the Zarathian Empire wasn't conquered. The humans didn't start claiming planets or enslaving the population. Instead, the fleet pressed deeper into their space, hitting only military targets. Supply depots were vaporized. Orbital defense platforms went dark. Key government buildings were surrounded and isolated, but not a single civilian district was touched. On the Zarathian planets, human soldiers landed, but they didn't come with fire and guns. They set up public information centers and broadcast one simple message in every local dialect. "We are not at war with your people. We are here for the leaders who tried to murder our mother. Stay out of our way and you will not be harmed. Help us find the guilty, and this will all be over that much faster." The Zarathians had prepared for monsters. What they got were soldiers sharing their food with hungry kids, medics treating the wounded on both sides, and officers who sincerely apologized for the disturbance and promised to leave as soon as they could. This quiet, respectful occupation was infinitely more terrifying than any brutal invasion. On the Cathali homeworld, Ambassador Varmoth watched the broadcast, tears openly streaming down his face. "They could level everything," he whispered to his staff. "They could burn the Zarathian Empire to the ground, and not a single power in the galaxy could do a thing to stop them. But they're not. They are choosing not to." "But why?" one of his aides asked, confused. "After what the Zarathians did to them?" "Because," Varmoth said, his voice filled with awe, "that is what it means to be human. They are not defined by cruelty or evil. They are defined by their choices. And today, they have chosen to be merciful." He shook his head slowly. "The Zarathians targeted the wrong person. They attacked the living embodiment of human compassion. And in response, humanity is showing the entire galaxy that their mercy wasn't a weakness held by one woman. It's a strength that defines their entire species." Back on Earth, in a heavily guarded hospital room, General Amara Chen slowly opened her eyes. She felt fragile, like she was made of glass. A dull ache throbbed in her chest where the energy weapon had torn through her, but she was alive. "James," she whispered, asking for her son. A nurse came to her side and gently explained what had happened. The war, the unbelievable victory, the fleet's careful advance through enemy territory. Amara closed her eyes again as fresh tears began to fall. Not of pride, but of profound sadness. "All that fighting," she murmured. "All that pain. I spent my whole life trying to stop this from happening." "Ma'am," the nurse said gently, "your son gave strict orders. No civilians were to be harmed, no unnecessary damage. They are being as careful as possible." Amara gave a weak nod. That sounds like my boy. He was always a good listener." She laid back, her mind a whirlwind of the peace she'd championed, the war that had broken it, and what could possibly happen now. At that very moment, deep inside the collapsing Zyritheian Empire, High Archon Velketh was cowering in his palace. The all-powerful leader who had greenlit the assassination was now a man on the run. His legendary fleet was a tomb, his government was in shambles, and his own people were calling for his head. Suddenly, a calm voice cut through the silence of the grand hall. "High Archon Velketh," said James Chen, his voice quiet but echoing with authority. "On behalf of the United Earth government and under galactic law, you are under arrest. The charges are crimes against peace, crimes against humanity, and the attempted assassination of a diplomatic envoy. You will answer for your actions. Justice has arrived." Velketh stared at the young human standing before him. He was poised, powerful, with eyes that burned with both fury and an ironclad control. This was the son of the woman he'd tried to have killed. "You could just kill me," Velketh spat. "No one would care. No one would even blame you." "You're right," James said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I could. Believe me, I've spent every moment since you hurt my mother thinking of 1,000 ways to do it myself." He took one step forward. "But that's not who we are. My mother didn't raise a monster. You're going to face a real trial, and the entire galaxy is going to watch." Human soldiers moved forward and took the trembling, defeated Velketh into custody. The war was finished, but the hard part, the part that truly mattered, was just getting started. The trial of High Archon Velketh was streamed to every planet, moon, and outpost in known space. Trillions of beings watched as the once mighty ruler was brought before an interspecies tribunal. He wasn't wearing his opulent robes, just a plain gray prisoner's jumpsuit. His pale blue skin seemed almost translucent under the harsh courtroom lights. His eyes, which once held such arrogance, were now just hollow and empty. Admiral James Chen watched from the public gallery. He'd done his job. He'd delivered the man who started it all to the scales of justice. Now, it was up to the law to weigh his crimes. The evidence was crushing. Audio logs of Velketh planning the attack, testimony from his own disillusioned advisors, hard proof that General Chen was never a threat and the entire incident was a fabrication. Velketh tried to plead his case, talking about some galactic natural order and the duty of elder races to keep the younger ones down. He droned on about tradition, destiny, and history, but the court wasn't buying it. After listening patiently, they found him guilty on every single charge. But he wasn't sentenced to death. Humanity had made a special request to take that option off the table. His punishment was far more fitting. He would live out his very long life on a barren prison world, alone with nothing but his memories, forced to watch the galaxy change in all the ways he fought so hard to prevent. Some thought it was too lenient, but those who understood Velketh knew that for a man obsessed with his legacy, being forgotten was a fate much worse than death. With the trial over, a huge question hung in the air. What now? The old galactic peace treaty was in pieces. The established balance of power was gone. and something new had to rise from the ashes. 3 months after the verdict, a massive assembly was called on Concordia Prime. The station, now fully repaired, featured a memorial in the Great Hall, marking the very spot where General Chen had been struck down. Representatives from every known species began to arrive. It wasn't just the old galactic superpowers, but also the smaller, long-ignored species, races that had never had a say in anything. Humanity sent 2 representatives, Admiral James Chen, his crisp military uniform a reminder of the power that had just saved them all. And next to him, still recovering in a hover chair, was his mother, General Amara Chen. The moment she entered, a profound silence swept through the hall. This was the woman who had been shot. The woman whose brush with death had started a war and whose miraculous survival had helped build a new peace. Amara looked older, the ordeal having clearly taken a toll, but her eyes were as sharp, as kind, and as full of hope as they had always been. Her son gently guided her to the speaker's platform. She took a long moment, just gazing out at the endless sea of faces, so many different beings from every corner of the galaxy, all of them watching her. "I died on this spot," she began, her voice soft but carrying to every corner of the vast room. "For a few minutes my heart stopped beating. I was gone." She lightly touched the memorial next to her. "When I finally woke up, they told me everything that had happened. They told me about the war, the lightning-fast campaigns, and the sheer destructive power my son had unleashed. And then," she paused, letting the weight of her words settle, "they told me about the mercy he showed." Her gaze swept across the assembly, seeming to pierce into the soul of every person there. "My son commanded a fleet that could have ground the entire Zarathian Empire to dust, and not a single person here could have stopped him. Truthfully, no one would have blamed him either. I am his mother, and they had just tried to kill me." Behind her, James stood like a statue, his face unreadable. "But," she went on, "he chose another way. He chose to wage war only against those who had started it, and he chose to protect the millions of innocent people who had nothing to do with it. He chose mercy, especially when it was the hardest choice to make." Amara's voice suddenly rang out with undeniable strength. "That decision, that's what it means to be human. It isn't our starships, our weapons, or our advanced technology. It's our capacity to choose. We can be monsters. We can be destroyers. The galaxy knows that now. You've all seen what we're capable of when pushed too far." She let a heavy silence fill the room. "But we can also be builders. We can be healers. We can be allies. That is the other side of us, and that is who we choose to be today." She gestured to the incredible diversity of beings around her. "The old Pax Galactica is finished. It was a peace built on fear. Fear of each other, fear of the powerful, fear of what would happen if the delicate balance was ever broken. That fear kept us apart just as much as it kept us in check." She reached out, and James took her hand, helping her stand a little straighter. "I'm here to propose something different, not a treaty of fear, but a covenant of equals. Every species, no matter how large or small, ancient or new, will have a voice. Every species will help shape the future we will all live in." She then turned her gaze directly to the new Zarathian delegation. These were the new leaders who had risen after the tyrant Velketh was overthrown. "Even those who have wronged us will have a place at this table, because holding on to old hatreds only guarantees new conflicts. Believe me, I know, I could hate your entire race for what your former leader did. But what good would that do? It would only poison my own heart, and it would do nothing to change the past." The Zarathian diplomats bowed their heads, their expressions a mix of deep shame and overwhelming gratitude. Amara continued, "This new covenant will have simple rules. No species will attack another without just cause. No species will ever enslave or oppress another. We will solve our disputes with words, and if words aren't enough, we will use fair and impartial judgment." A small smile touched her lips. "And if anyone breaks these rules, if anyone gets any bright ideas about conquest, well, they should remember that humanity is still here. We will be ready." Her smile faded. "We have no desire to be the galaxy's police. We don't want to be feared. We want to be partners and friends. But we will never again let what happened to me happen to anyone else. That is our solemn promise. That is our covenant." The hall was completely silent for what felt like an eternity. Then, a single set of hands began to clap, and the sound quickly spread like a shockwave. It erupted into a thunderous roar of agreement from 1,000 different worlds. The Covenant of Equals was signed that same day. Every major power added their name, and every smaller species was personally asked to join. For the first time in galactic history, there was a real union, a true fellowship of all intelligent beings. And in the years that followed, things began to change. The galaxy slowly started to heal from the scars of that short, vicious war. Trade lanes hummed with renewed life. Knowledge was shared openly between planets. Problems that had once been considered impossible were now being solved by the combined minds of hundreds of different species working as one. General Amara Chen made a complete recovery and returned to her diplomatic work, traveling from world to world, strengthening the bonds of the new covenant. Her son, James, eventually left the military. He became a public administrator, using his brilliant strategic mind to build things instead of destroying them. But humanity's hidden fleets were never taken apart. The secret superweapons were never decommissioned. Each new generation of humans was taught how to maintain them, just as their ancestors had for centuries. Peace was a wonderful thing, but humanity never forgot how quickly it could be lost. On the 10th anniversary of the Covenant, a celebration was held on Concordia Prime. It was a smaller, more intimate event this time. It was a gathering of delegates who were now old friends, meeting to celebrate the incredible future they had built together. General Chen, now 73 but still as sharp as ever, stood in the memorial garden that had been planted on the exact spot where she had been attacked. The garden was a wonder, filled with plants from every known planet in the galaxy, a living, growing symbol of their unity. James stood by her side, his own hair now streaked with gray. All around them, beings from dozens of species mingled peacefully, their varied voices and laughter filling the air. That's when a small family cautiously approached them. They were Zarathian, a mother, a father, and 2 small children, visiting Concordia Prime for the first time. The younger child, a little girl maybe 5 years old, clutched a single flower in her tiny blue hand. She nervously shuffled up to General Chen as her parents watched from a few steps away, their faces etched with worry. Are you the lady from the stories?" the little girl whispered. Amara knelt down, ignoring the creak in her old knees. "And what stories are those, little one?" "My grandmother tells me," the girl said, her voice barely audible. "She says you're the one who taught the whole galaxy how to be kind again." Amara looked at the child's innocent face and felt the sudden burn of tears in her eyes. "I tried," she said softly. "We all tried together." The little girl held out the flower. "This is for you to say thank you." She glanced back at her parents, who gave her a small nod of encouragement, and to say sorry for what the bad man did. Amara gently took the flower. It was a small, delicate bloom, purple and white, native to the Zarathian homeworld. It was an apology from a child who had never done anything wrong. "Thank you," Amara managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. "It's beautiful." The little girl beamed with pride and then ran back to her parents. They gave General Chen a deep, respectful bow before melting back into the crowd. James helped his mother to her feet. "Do you think it will last?" he asked quietly. "This peace we've made." Amara watched the Zarathian family disappear behind a grove of bioluminescent trees. the little girl now holding her mother's hand, pointing excitedly at all the alien plants. "Maybe," she said, "and maybe not. Peace isn't a monument you build once and then admire from a distance. It requires constant work. Every day, every generation has to make that same choice all over again." She looked up at the stars glittering through the garden's transparent dome. "But that's what we humans do, isn't it? We never give up. We never stop building. It's our choice," she said, "to be more than what's required of us." Her gaze fell upon her son, the soldier who could have scorched worlds but chose compassion instead. "And if the peace ever shatters," James added, knowing her thought, "we'll be there to pick up the pieces." Amara's lips curved into a smile as she squeezed his hand. "We always are." All around them, the universe spun on, teeming with people going about their days, building, dreaming, fighting, and forgiving. It was never going to be perfect, and conflict would always exist, but it was finally growing in the same direction, united. Deep within the data banks of every planet and in the lessons taught to every school child, a quiet update was made to humanity's entry in the galactic record. The label that had defined them for 900 long years, primitive species protected status, was gone. In its place were 4 simple words: humanity, approach with respect. The change was tiny, almost invisible, but its meaning was monumental. General Amara Chen carefully nestled the small purple blossom into the rich earth of the memorial garden. She was planting one more bit of life in a place that had once known only death and destruction. "Don't forget who we are," she murmured, the words she'd spoken a decade before now coming back to her. And finally, after so long, the rest of the galaxy was beginning to understand. They were human. They held the capacity for both terrifying ruin and endless grace. They were ferocious protectors and tender healers, the architects of civilization and the sentinels of peace. They were a living contradiction, and every single morning they decided which part of themselves they would show the cosmos. That was their power. That was the legacy they would leave behind. The new covenant would survive, not because of powerful weapons or threats, but because it was built on a promise made fresh each day by trillions of souls choosing to be better, to stand together, and to honor the painful lessons of their history. And should a time come when that promise was ever in danger, when a shadow threatened to fall across the stars again, humanity would be there, a silent guardian, watchful and prepared. But their deepest hope, their constant prayer, was that their weapons would stay silent forever. And that, more than anything else, was what it truly meant to be human.